Good afternoon to all my esteemed colleagues and honored guests. I am Lavanya, and it's my great honor and privilege to welcome you all to today's special session on computation of emotions. We are gathered here at the intersection of technology and human experience, exploring one of the most fascinating frontiers in human-computer interaction. Today, we have distinct honor of hosting Professor Peter Robinson from the University of Cambridge, one of the leading minds in the field. But before we dive in, let me introduce you to our chapter. ACMVIT, the Association for Computing Machinery, is one of the most reputed chapters in VIT Vellore. We are a passionate team of innovators, problem solvers, and tech enthusiasts dedicated to making technology accessible and exciting for all. More than organization, we are a community that thrives on pushing boundaries and exploring the unknown. Professor Robinson's pioneering work at Cambridge Computer Laboratory has redefined how we understand the relationship between emotions and computing systems. His research on effective computing and human-computer interaction has opened new pathways for machines to recognize, interpret, and respond to human emotions. Over several decades, he has been at the forefront of research on the boundary between people and computers, pioneering work that has shaped how we understand and design the interface that connects us with the technology. As the head of Rainbow Research Group at Cambridge, Professor Robinson has led groundbreaking projects exploring computer systems that can detect and respond to human emotions through expressions, vocal patterns, and psychological signals. The topic of today's session, computation of emotions, could not be more timely. As our devices grow more sophisticated, the ability of computers to recognize and interpret and even express human emotions is becoming a central challenge and an opportunity in technology. Professor Robinson has been a leader in this area, investigating both inference of emotions cues and expressions of emotions by robots and avatars. His research has broad implication from inclusive user interface that accommodate diverse need to applications in education, therapy, and commerce and beyond. Professor Robinson's work reminds us that technology at its best just doesn't serve practical needs but also recognize and responds to our humanity and its all complexity. Professor Robinson, we at ACMVIT are honored by your presence and eagerly anticipate your insights and look forward to an engaging session on on computation of emotions. Thank you, sir.
So, thank you very much for the invitation and thank you for your kind introduction. I'm going to be talking today about emotions, and that's odd because we don't usually think of computers as having feelings. We think of computers as being very rational, just pure thought. But I'm interested in studying the ways that people interact with machines. And we can learn a lot about that from the way that people interact with each other. And when we talk to each other, we look at each other's faces. We can see things that are happening in the face, and they tell us what the person's thinking. We can listen to the way that they're saying something. So not what they're saying, but how they're saying it. And that tells us something about their emotions. We can even look at their body manner, posture, gesture, and understand things from that. So normally when I'm talking to an audience, I can see the faces and watch the body movements of the audience, and I can understand whether they're interested or bored, confused or understanding. And if you're lucky, I change what I'm doing accordingly. Well, uh, people who can't do that are at a social disadvantage. It's people with autism spectrum conditions. And in that sense, computers are autistic. So we've been working for best part of 25 years now, looking at ways in which we can give computers some sort of understanding of people's emotions, mental states, as we would say more formally. And that's what I'm going to be talking about today. So the general plan is I'll talk a little bit about the general background for how people signal these social signals, if you like, way that we communicate with each other about what we're thinking through silent facial gestures, through body posture and gesture, and through things like tone of voice. And I'll talk a bit about how we can analyze those by computer to give the computer a little bit of understanding, emotional understanding. And then, just for fun, I'll talk a bit about how actually the same things work for animals. Um, and then I'll talk about ways in which computers can be made expressive, emotionally expressive in their communication with us. And then finally, I'll talk a bit about uh, what it is if we can give machines these human-like characteristics, what is it that makes us still human? And why are humans different from machines? So that's a lot to cover. So I'll move fairly quickly. And I'm going to start by talking a bit about these social signals, understanding emotions. And this has been something that's been of interest to scientists for many years. So Charles Darwin, famous Cambridge professor, wrote his book on the origin of species, which made him very famous. And about 10 years later, he published a book on the expression of the emotions in man and animals. Wonderful title. And he was interested in seeing if there was some common language in facial expressions in particular, but also in body posture and gesture, that conveyed people's mental states. And he published his book, and it sold out completely in 2 weeks. So it was a bestseller, which is unusual for a scientific textbook. And it's an interesting book because it's one of the first scientific works to include photographs. And on the right-hand side there, you see a plate from the book, one of the pages in the book, which shows 6 little photographs of people. Darwin had collaborated with a man called Guillaume Duchenne de Boulogne working in Paris, and they corresponded because Duchenne was interested in the same problems. And Duchenne had worked by collecting photographs of various people displaying different emotions. And on the very right-hand side, you can see 3 photographs of this old man. And the top one is a neutral expression, no particular emotion. The middle one shows him having been told a joke, and he's laughing. And at the bottom one, he's actually got electrodes, you can't quite see them, attached to his face to stimulate the muscles, to see if they could work out which muscles were used when you were smiling. And the pictures on the left are some that Darwin had collected himself. And actually, there's the same idea that the girl in the hat in the middle is a posed photograph, and sorry, it's a genuine smile. She was actually amused, whereas the ones at the top and the bottom are actually both posed. And it's actually a difference. When we're genuinely happy, we show a movement near the eyes that we can't actually control ourselves. And you can tell the difference between a genuine smile and an artificial smile by looking at that, which is kind of interesting. Well, Darwin was interested to know if this was a universal language. Did everybody share the same understanding of these expressions in the face? And so he did an experiment. It was a crowdsourcing experiment. Of course, crowdsourcing was a bit different in those days. What he did was invite people round to his country house, and over drinks before dinner, he passed round some photographs, photographs from the collection that Duchenne had made in Paris. And uh, these were actually very valuable. Duchenne had made these photographs, and they're quite big. They're about the size of an A4 sheet of paper. Uh, and Darwin had one set of these, and he passed them round. And what he did well, in fact, we have in Darwin's archives in our university library here those very pictures. And what Darwin did with them was pass them round and ask people what emotions they saw in the expression on the faces. And he put the answers in a spreadsheet. And we've got the spreadsheets in the university library as well. The spreadsheets, of course, aren't on a computer. There weren't any. They're on big sheets of paper, and you can see those on the left there. And there's a row for each of the pictures and a column for each of the people. And he just wrote in what the people saw. And you can see his sample size wasn't very big. It was a bit difficult to do large experiments with only one set of photographs. But he saw that there was a common expression there. And that's what he wrote about in his book. Well, we repeated this experiment about 10 years ago using modern crowdsourcing on the internet. So what we did was digitized some of Darwin's photographs, 10 of them that you see there, and put them on the web and asked people to label them with what emotion they thought they saw in the face. And we got about 20,000 people. So about 1,000 times as many as Darwin had. And what you see there in the labels under the pictures, the top row are the common understanding that Darwin's discovered at his crowdsourcing, and at the bottom, the ones that we discovered in the crowdsourcing. And we came to the same conclusion as Darwin. There was a common view, people understood what the expressions meant, and actually they were pretty well the same as they'd been 100 years earlier. The language had changed slightly, but otherwise people saw the same thing there. So this was rather fun. It shows that Darwin was onto something. And, well, Darwin fell out of favour, actually, in the early 20th century. And it was only in the 1960s that a man called Paul Ekman, a psychologist working in California, decided to revisit the work that Darwin had done. Now, of course, photographs had become more commonplace by the 1960s, and Paul Ekman focused on 6 mental states, which are very similar to the ones that Darwin had studied. Anger, disgust, fear, joy, sadness, and surprise. And he took photographs of actors acting these and then did a massive experiment showing them to people and concluded that there was a common understanding. Actually, more than that, he could post his photographs off around the world and ask people what they saw, and the common understanding was actually cross-cultural. So that was an interesting piece of work, but the trouble is, these are what we might call very visceral, basic, physical emotions. They're ones that are to do with survival, which is why they interested Darwin. So you need to know if you're talking to somebody who's angry, because they might hit you. You need to know if someone's afraid of you, because it can make them irrational. You need to know if somebody's disgusted, because it might mean they've eaten something that's bad for them, and it would be a good idea if you didn't eat it either, and so on and so on. So these are very basic emotions, but they're not ones that we actually experience very often. And a more subtle analysis was done by a man called Simon Baron-Cohen, Professor Sir Simon Baron-Cohen here in Cambridge, who runs the Autism Research Centre in Cambridge. And he was interested in trying to understand the nature of autism. So people who can't understand these emotions in other people's faces. And he's done a lot of scientific work on the genetic basis of autism and so on. And he's also interested in ways that you might be able to detect it very early in a child's life. And it's known that if you detect it early, you can actually treat it, address it, and give some help to the children. Well, the way that he did this was by devising a different catalogue, taxonomy, of mental states, of emotions. And it's much more elaborate than the 6 that Ekman looked at, or the 7 that Darwin looked at. What he did was to take 1,200 or so words out of the spelling checker dictionary in Microsoft Word and got a group of psychologists together who worked out whether these words were synonymous, meant the same thing, or they were different. And he identified just over 400 very finely graduated different concepts, and then a lot of synonyms that actually meant the same thing. And then grouped these together and got 24 higher level groups of mental state. And of course, amongst those were the 6 basic emotions that Ekman had studied, not altogether surprisingly. And these are the ones that are actually fairly easily recognized. You can recognize them from a still photograph. But the other 18 were altogether more interesting. These are what are called complex mental states, and they reflect what you're thinking. So they're cognitive mental states. And these are things like understanding and confused, interested and bored. They're rather harder to detect, but much more important if you're interacting with a computer because they're much more common. So, having done this analysis, Simon Baron-Cohen was interested in seeing if there were ways he could use this as an intervention with children with high functioning autism, so very intelligent children, but just lacking the ability to understand these expressions in people's faces. And what he did was put together a DVD with actors acting out these mental states, and all 400 of the very finely graduated mental states, and got several recordings of each, and found 6 that a panel of 10 psychologists agreed were a good representation. Put these 2,500 videos on a DVD, and then put some games around it and turned it into a teaching tool, if you like. Well, it turned out actually it wasn't terribly useful for the children with high functioning autism. They got very good at recognizing the videos on the DVD, but not so good at transferring it to other contexts. And that's an interesting problem. It says something about the nature of autism. But the DVD was exactly what we needed as computer scientists to train a machine learning system. We had high quality video with very good labeling, and labeling is important. So we could use that to train a machine. And I had a very clever research student called Rana El-Kalioubi who built a system that did just that. She identified 6 conditions that we would like to recognize when people were interacting with computers. So agreeing, disagreeing, interested, and so on. And what she did was populate each of these 6 conditions with somewhere between 5 and 10 of the 400 mental states. So we were using about only 10% of the entire vocabulary of emotions. So it's worth knowing that this is really quite a narrow sample, but it's the ones that we thought were important for interaction with computer. And then what we do is point a camera at someone's face and analyze what we're seeing and display the results. And you can see us demonstrate, that's me back in 2009, demonstrating at an exhibition in London. So we have a camera pointing at someone and we're showing the results on the screen. And what's going on is we're going through frame by frame through the video and identifying, in this case, about 24 feature points on the face, the edges of the eyes. The eyes are very important for emotion, and the mouth and the nose. And from that, we can work out the head pose, left, right, up, down. And we can then also look at features like the shape of the eyes, the shape of the mouth. Is it open, surprise, or open, laughing? The difference being you can see the teeth when someone's smiling and you don't when they're surprised, and so on and so on. So we had a language of actions. Actually, it's one devised by Paul Ekman that describes the muscle movement. So head up and head down, head left, head right, mouth open, and so on. And it really is related to the muscles in the face, which ones are operating. And from those, we derived higher level displays, gestures, if you like. So nodding is a sequence of head up, head down, and disagreeing is a sequence of head left, head right. And then from those combinations of these gestures, we can infer the mental state. And the action units we can recognize pretty well a frame at a time, but the gestures we take about a sixth of a second to identify, and the mental states it takes about 2 seconds to recognize. So it's actually using time information as well. And here's a demonstration of the system. That's the picture that you were seeing on the screen when the young lady was trying it at our exhibition. And what you see here is a picture of a person. If you look very carefully, you can see spots on her face. We haven't painted her face, those are just diagnostic. They're the features that we're tracking. You can see around the mouth, around the eyes in particular. And on the left-hand side of the screen, you can see various gestures. And the top one is nodding, and second one is head shaking, and so on. And then at the bottom, you see the mental states that we're inferring. And she was being asked to act as if she was agreeing, and the red trace is agreeing. And actually, you see a lot of that. It takes a couple of seconds for the system to kick in. It's got to recognize the nodding gesture. And then there was a little pause halfway through, and then a bit more nodding. And then she stopped, and we got this burst of green. Green is showing interest. She was interested in knowing if it had worked. And we said, well, yes, but we'd like you to do a bit more, please. So the blue is actually concentrating. She concentrated, got a bit more agreeing, and she stopped again. So if you watch the video again, you'll see all that happening. So lots of nodding, we get the agreement trace, and then she stops. Has it worked? Oh no, do a bit more, please. Concentrates and does a bit more agreeing. And we pick that up. Well, of course, I've chosen that example because it works well and demonstrates how the system works. But we did a more complex trial. We took all of the videos that we'd used for training and then went through, leaving one out, and trained the system on the rest, and then analyzed the one we'd left out, and so on and so on. And what we can build up then is what's called a confusion matrix. So this is this diagram you see here. Across the horizontal axis, you have the labels of what the videos were meant to represent. And receding into the distance, you see the different inferences. What we did, incidentally, was force the system to make a single choice. So just it would pick the emotion with the largest area under that probability curve that you saw coming out. And so for some emotions, it's really good. So for concentrating, for example, what's the best one? Concentrating, it's almost 90% accurate. And it's not really confusing that with anything. And the least good is thinking. That's the blue one. That's only about 65% accurate. And we can see that we're feeding in a thinking video, and it's being interpreted as green, concentrating, or yellow, disagreeing, or possibly as black, unsure. That is, the person's unsure, not the system's unsure. And if you think about it, if you're thinking, well, it might be because you're concentrating or disagreeing. Sorry, it's interest. Yellow is interested. Red is disagreeing, and there's very little show of that. Yellow is interested, or you might be uncertain about something. So actually, those are reasonable confusions, but it tells us something very important about this sort of computing. And that is, we don't get a clear single answer. All we get are probabilities. And we've got to use this information very carefully because they are only probabilities. They're not definite binary choices, one way or the other. Well, that was using Simon Baron-Cohen's catalogue of mental states, particularly concentrating on the cognitive mental states. But there are other ways of thinking about mental states. Another popular one was devised by a Canadian psychologist called James Russell, working in the 1970s, 1980s. And he had this idea that he should take all of these words for mental states, emotions, and invite people to spread them out on a table so that similar ones would be close together and different ones far apart. And so you can see that this is where the words tended to concentrate. You can see that happy and glad are there on the right-hand side, close together, and depressed and gloomy are at the opposite side of the table, but also close together, depressed and gloomy, similar. And then there's a vertical, so there's a horizontal axis here, which is very important. It's called valence, and it goes from negative, depressed, gloomy, to positive, happy, content. But there's also a vertical axis, and people separated them in a vertical way. And so you can see this particularly amongst the positive valence emotions on the right-hand side. Some of them are high up, like delighted, and some of them are low down, like relaxed, pleased. And the difference there is the arousal, the amount that the person's animated, going from passive at the very bottom to active at the very top. So you might be slightly negative and passive, tired, drowsy, or you might be slightly negative and active, alarmed, afraid. And so it gives us two dimensions that can describe the emotions. And computer scientists quite like numbers, and having coordinates for each emotion rather appeals. Now, actually, it's a great deal more complicated than that, and it turns out that uh, of course, the emotions cover an area in this space, but nevertheless, this idea that there are underlying concepts of valence and arousal is important. And actually, they cover about half of the variance in the data. What we're doing here is a sort of principal component analysis, and we've got two dimensions. You can carry on and get more dimensions, which I don't show in this picture. The next one is potency. Is it a weak or strong emotion? And then tendency. Is it an inward feeling emotion or an outward feel? Is it what I feel about me, or is it what I feel about you? And so this is another way of describing mental states, probably less useful for computing, but nevertheless, we built a new system that could analyze this as well. And this actually involved a much more sophisticated face tracker that we built ourselves. In fact, this research student, Tadas Baltrushaitis, built it. Extraordinarily clever research student, now leading scientist at Microsoft. And he built a system that tracks about 70 points on the face. You can see them highlighted in yellow. Again, just diagnostics, not painted on his face. And then there's a box which shows you the head posture. So the first thing is to find the orientation of the head, and we normalize it into that little picture you see at the bottom left, and then use a very abstract technique called histograms of oriented gradients, which is that funny black and white picture, which is just showing how the illumination levels vary across all these tiny divisions, tiles in the picture. And this gives you a huge dimensional space. And we then do a dimensional reduction. And then from that, we can infer the action units that actually are in a language described by Paul Ekman. So roughly speaking, which muscles are active. And you see the histograms across the bottom showing that it's things like brows lifting and lips pulling and so on. And from those, we can infer both the valence and arousal. And you see a chart drifting around showing that evolving in time at the top, and also the discrete mental states at the bottom. And here we're just looking for Ekman's 6 basic emotions, so disgust, anger, surprise. And you can see as he acts it out, we get quite good results. So this is, again, work that's about 10 years old. This face, well, various things. This face tracker has been used in thousands of universities and commercial systems for face tracking. It's the world's best, and it's available free. And the emotion recognition is the basis of a lot of research work by people elsewhere. So it's actually a very important piece of work. But the earlier work was taken by the student who did the work originally, Rana Al-Kalyubi, and she set up a company in America that was trying to sell this idea of monitoring, well, in the first instance, just valence. And there was a particular market for this she was looking at, which is advertising companies showing preliminary versions of advertisements to a small audience. And she could, the advertising companies do this. They show the uh, draft movie, a draft advertisement to a small crowd, and then have a whole load of people watching the crowd and seeing how they react. Well, Rana could automate this. She pointed a camera at the crowd, analysed all the faces, and said whether it was getting the right response or not. And more recently, she's done work on monitoring drivers in cars, because it's quite important in a modern car that the car understands what the driver is thinking, because the driver might actually find that the car's doing a lot of the driving automatically, and so the car needs to know if the driver is still awake, but also if they're confused. If you're driving a modern car with lots of telemetry and you're lost, late for a meeting in an unfamiliar city centre, the last thing you want is the car telling you that you need to change the oil in 1,000 kilometres. What it should do is see that you're confused and concentrating and remove distractions. So stop your mobile phone from ringing, maybe turn the radio off, maybe even let you drive in the wrong direction for a bit until you recover your composure and then bring you back in when you're ready to drive through this difficult conditions. So that's actually proved very successful. And a lot of modern cars are actually obliged to have this driver monitoring if they have a degree of automation. And her system's one of the main ones that's used. But we actually did some work with this system. It was actually developed as part of a big European project that was trying to find a different intervention for children with high functioning autism. And you learn how to do something by doing it, learning by doing. And so the idea was that if you could get these intelligent children who know they have a problem recognizing emotions, if we could get them to act out emotions, then they might learn how to recognize them. And so we, huge efforts spanning universities in the UK, Germany, Italy, Sweden, Turkey, Israel. So a huge collaborative project, and we different groups worked on different things. One group gathered videos that the children then had to copy, and then in Cambridge, we wrote the system that analysed their facial expressions using that face tracker you've just seen. The group in Germany analysed the tone of voice to try and infer emotions. The group in Italy analysed their body posture and gestures, and then combined all of this to give them feedback on how well they were acting. And the group in Israel were actually doing experiments with children and found that this was actually a useful help. And the system's sold commercially in the United States now. So we can be quite good at recognizing, well, facial expressions I've talked about, but I've hinted at the fact that it's also important to listen to voice and to watch body posture and gesture. And there you see a photograph of our lab. We have a motion capture system. So the student at the front with his arms out is actually being monitored, seeing how he's moving, and we're analyzing that. And various other people are doing other experiments in the background. And we're also interested in actually being able to make computer systems that express emotions, either through cartoons or maybe through robots. So I'll just talk about some of the other analyses for a moment. Analyzing voice is a lot more difficult than analyzing facial expressions, or it's very different. For facial expressions, there are muscles that are doing it. And if you work out which muscles are going, you know quite a lot about the person. But the voice isn't like that. It's very abstract. You've just got this continuous sound coming in. So I had another student, Sobel Schickler, who analysed this, and what she did was work out lots of metrics of the voice, roughly speaking, energy in different frequency bands, and then the derivatives of those. How much is it changing? And so from those, you can derive things like the energy, total amount of energy in all of those. You can detect the pitch by where the energy is concentrated in different frequency bands. Um, and you can detect the tempo from the rate at which it's changing. Well, that's very abstract. How do you infer emotions from that? And what she discovered was if you've just got two different mental states that you're trying to distinguish, some of these metrics will help. Maybe just two or three will be sufficient to separate them. But if you've got, so let's say, something like anger and boredom, a couple of metrics will separate those. And if you've got anger and confusion, well, a couple of metrics will separate those, but different metrics. And if you want to separate boredom and confusion, a couple of metrics will separate those, but different from any of the ones you've used previously. So what you do is do a bit of data mining to find out which metrics do each of the pairwise comparisons. You've then got preferences, more A than B, more A than C, more B than C, say. And then so you know that A is probably the one you want. And that's roughly what she does. She does all of these pairwise conditions. If we're looking for n different mental conditions, then you'll have a half n times n minus 1 pairwise comparisons, and then we combine those in some sort of voting system. And you can choose the voting system to suit yourself. One is just to see which is the actual winner, a bit more like a real electoral competition. And that's the confusion diagram at the top. You see here we're using 9 different conditions, and again, a pretty strong diagonal and various confusions. But she also was interested in the possibility that maybe you're expressing more than one emotion at once. And that's not unusual. In which case, why not add support to any mental or any of these conditions that wins, say, more than half of its pairwise comparisons? And that gives you the confusion diagram at the bottom, a much higher diagonal, but lots of off diagonal, because now we can get more than one emotion at a time being recognized. And that's turned out to be quite a useful tool, and that also has moved into commercial use. We worked with a local company that trains people for public speaking, and what they did, they know that there are various abstract qualities in your speech that makes it interesting. Um, how many different pitches you use, how you vary the loudness, and so on. And then you can turn that into a more subjective description. It's pleasant to listen to, or it's clear, or whatever. And we can do both of those automatically. Doing the pitch analysis is easy because we just do the signals processing on the audio, and then we can use machine learning to train the system to actually recognize conditions in the voice that are interesting. And you can tell the person, well, you've got to be a bit more dynamic in your speaking. And I had a very clever undergraduate student who did this as a final year project, actually, Thomas Pfister, now head of AI at Google. So some of my research students, having worked on this, did quite well. Well, that was voice, quickly discovered. What about posture? Well, faces don't always tell us the whole story. Here you see some photographs of tennis players, and you can see that something important's happened because their faces are showing it. It's an open mouth and a clearly very emotional, very strong emotion, but what is it? And actually, if you look at the rest of their bodies, you can see what it is. The first two are disappointment. If you look at their body posture, it's slumped and the hand is open and it's not gone well. And the two on the right, something good has happened. You can see that their fists are clenched and their body is much more erect. So actually, the body posture and the gestures with the hands tell us something about their mental states that we can't see from the face alone. So we set about trying to analyze that. Now, actually, monitoring body posture is a lot more difficult. You saw my student Daniel Bernhardt in the photograph of our lab, and what he was doing was wearing lots of reflective dots. And you can see I'm here wearing a rather smart lycra suit covered with reflective dots. And we have a camera system that can track those to millimeter accuracy 200 times a second. And from that, we can then fit a skeleton to the person. So as I'm doing the actions, we have a skeleton that is actually showing exactly where my major muscles, major joint angles are, and we can then analyze those. So, in fact, some colleagues in Edinburgh had used a very similar system to gather data, and so we actually used their data set. And the people in Edinburgh had got a group of people to act out 4 different activities. So knocking, which is the one you see here, lifting something, throwing something, and walking. And also to colour these with 4 different emotions: a neutral emotion, an angry emotion, a happy emotion, and a sad emotion. And actually, you see there, these are both knocking. The top one's angry. You can see there's a sort of energy in it. And the bottom one is sad, his much gentler, sadder, bowed posture. And they recorded 2 trials for each of these 4 emotions, doing 4 activities. So a total of 32 videos for 30 subjects, so about 1,000 videos. And my student, Daniel, then analysed these to see if he could infer the mental states. And actually what he found was that you identify what the person is doing, first of all. If you just look at all of these joint angles and their derivatives and their second derivatives and analyze those over time, you just see that the person's knocking or that they're walking or something. So that's not very useful. We want to know how they're doing it. So what he did was divide the motion up into segments. So for knocking, there's a one action that's sort of lifting the hand, and then there's a strike and a retract and a strike and a retract and a strike and a retract, and then finally hand down. So 4 different types of motion. And in between those, there's a pause. So you look for low energy points and divide it up, and then analyze each of these motion segments separately. Well, that helped, but all that did was then when we analysed those, we found out who it was who was doing it, because it turns out some people are just naturally much more energetic than others. So we actually had to train this on individuals, and that's different from face, which generalized well to any users, and voice, which generalized well to many users. Actually, the voice generalized to different languages, rather surprisingly. But this we had to train on the individual, and then it worked quite well. So on a 4-way forced choice, we were getting something like 80% recognition. Again, not perfect, never expect these things to be perfect, but not bad. But the trouble is you have to wear, well, this fancy suit to record the data, and you have to train the system to respond to you. So it's not really terrifically useful practically. Well, we did this work way back in 15 years ago. And of course, motion capture is much better now, so you don't need to wear the funny suit anymore. But even so, it's still a very individual thing, so possibly less useful. But we were interested in looking at applications of this technology as well. And one of the applications we looked at was car drivers. And so we wanted to be able to tell how a car driver was feeling depending on the surroundings. And that meant we needed training data, videos of drivers driving. So we got a car and instrumented it with cameras, one pointed at the driver. Here you see some of the videos from the monitoring the drivers. The particular system we were using happens to work quite well at night as well, just using infrared lighting. You can see that at the bottom. And we got 50 drivers, each to drive for an hour round the same route that involves some rural driving, some urban driving and some motorway, freeway driving. And the car was instrumented so we could see the views outside, and it was instrumented so we knew where it was, we knew what controls they were using, and so on. So we got massive collection of data. And what we observed was most of the time, people show a neutral face. They're bored. And then every so often something exciting happens, like a pedestrian steps in front of them, and they're alarmed and they have to do something. But the trouble is, that's not very useful for training because it's not repeatable. We need the same data for each person, and we can't get the pedestrian to jump in front of every driver. You don't get ethical approval for that. So we tried collecting data in our laboratory instead. And what we did was set up a driving simulator. So with a big screen, we got this simulating driving seat and see with the steering wheel and controls and so on. And we then got people to drive around a course there. And now they're in our laboratory. It's nice and repeatable. We know they're all going the same way. We can control the other traffic in the simulator. We can control the weather. And we can even stress the participants by making them do mental arithmetic at the same time. And we collected lots of data. And that was useless as well, because when people were distracted, having to do mental arithmetic at the same time as driving, all that we found was they crashed and they laughed because they knew it was a simulator. They didn't care. So that wasn't actually terribly useful. Good fun having the simulator, but it turns out not much use for collecting scientific data. We learn a lot from our mistakes. But our next experiment was much better. What we did was get some of these remote drones. These are the sorts of little toy drones that you can fly from your mobile phone. And we reprogrammed it so we could fly it using controls in our laboratory. So we put it onto the departmental Wi-Fi network and reprogrammed it so we could control it remotely. And then people could fly it off around the building, but the person flying it was in our laboratory, so we could monitor them and check their physiology and so on. And they were just seeing video relayed back from the drone on the screen in front. So here you see they're sitting in the driving simulator, but actually driving it using a joystick. My student Ian Davis, and you can see he gets a picture of what the drone is seeing as it flies around the building, and he can actually get a very realistic view. You also annoy all your colleagues by flying into their offices and out again, but that's another point. But then what we were able to do with that was make the participants do mental arithmetic, stress them, and the drone then fly it into the wall or it would crash. And that's very different from crashing in the driving simulator because somebody actually had to go out and pick it up and get it going again. And what we found, this is a slightly complicated diagram, what you're seeing there is the results of different experiments. So the left-hand charts are showing you the driving simulator, and the right-hand charts are showing you the remote control flying. And in each of those charts, the top is showing skin conductance. When you're stressed, you sweat and the electrical resistance of your skin drops, and you can monitor that, and it's often used as a test of arousal on the valence arousal chart. And the bottom one is heart rate. So again, when you're aroused, your heart rate goes up. And then within each of those measurements, we've got two bar charts, one on the left for normal driving and one on the right for when they're doing mental arithmetic. So what we see is in the left-hand pair, which are to do with the driving simulator, there's really no difference between easy driving and hard driving. The people weren't particularly bothered if they crashed. But on the right-hand side, we see a physiological response. Their heart rate goes up, and their skin conductivity goes up when they're being stressed because it's a real thing that they're doing. So actually that's quite interesting. It means that when you're doing data collection, it's very important to make it realistic. And a pure simulator is not realistic enough, but the remote control flying allowed us to do controlled experiments but that were emotionally engaging, and that was important. Well, I just want to say a few words about other species, just for the fun of it. Darwin talked about this in his book back in 1872. He talked about cats and dogs in particular, horses, monkeys actually, and the pictures at the top show a dog and a cat prepared to fight, and the ones at the bottom show a dog and a cat in an affectionate frame of mind. And the idea here is you can see their body postures are quite different. Well, we didn't particularly experiment on dogs and cats, but our department lives opposite the veterinary school and they have a lot of sheep. And they were quite interested in studying signals that sheep make in their faces. You may not know this, but sheep have very expressive faces. They show pain in particular. And so what you've got here at the top left is a happy sheep, and bottom right, a sad sheep. And sheep, in any flock of sheep, no matter how well they're looked after, some will have a condition in the foot rot, which hurts, so they get sad, or they get mastitis, and that makes them sad. And it's useful to detect this early. So the vets had been working on what they call a grimace scale, trying to understand from the face the mental state of the sheep. Is it feeling pain or not? And you can see it in the eyes. So the eyes are normally open, but when the sheep gets in pain, the eyes shut and actually pull back slightly. The cheeks draw in pain. The ears, which are normally upright, sort of fold down in pain. The lips draw back in pain, much tighter, and the nostrils go from a gentle U shape to a much sharper V shape when it's in pain. And the sheep do this without controlling it. So if we could monitor those, we could understand if the sheep was in pain. So here you see how we do it. And it's just the same as our other system. We were quite interested if we could translate our system to a different species. So we find sheep faces in an image and then normalize it just the way we did for the face. So tip it so that the eyes are level and in fixed places, and then do the same sort of idea of just around the key features, in this case the ears and the nostril. We're doing ears, eyes and nostril, histograms of oriented gradients again, so dividing the picture up into little tiles, analyzing the change of gradient, massive data reduction, use support vector machines, and we can then infer the level of pain on low or high for each of these 5 indicators: left, right ears, left, right eyes, and nostrils. And then we've got a scale of pain, and we can take a photograph of a flock of sheep. Here you see a whole load of sheep. You ask them to look at the camera. Interesting question. How do you get a flock of sheep to look at the camera? The answer is easy. You just shake a bag of food and they'll look at you. And then we pick out all of the faces, and you can't really see it, but they've all got boxes round, and the box is either green or red. Green if it's a happy sheep, so the one at the front on the left is a happy sheep, and there's one sort of 2 rows back whose ears whose nostrils beginning to go into a V shape, and one of whose ears is beginning to fold down, and that's actually moderate pain. And in this group of 20 sheep, we identified 2 that we thought were in pain. And that actually turned out to be exactly correct. They were the 2 sheep that actually had problems with their feet. So not a proper scientific test, but an indication that this actually works. So other species also display emotions. Well, I want to say a little bit to finish about expressing emotions. And there are different ways we can do this. Cartoon films can express emotions. If you've seen the film Wall-E, then you'll know about this. And maybe robots should express emotions. So there you see another one of my research students, Laurel Rick. She is working there with a little robot called the Now robot that's very popular for this sort of experiment. You can see it's about 1/2 meter tall. And here you see the Now robot. and it can move, albeit slowly. It's got about 25 degrees of freedom. It's got cameras in the eyes. It's got microphones to listen and ultrasound ranging. So it's quite well instrumented, but it moves pretty oddly. And in particular, its face is hard plastic. So its face doesn't really show emotion. No use at all for trying to express emotions to the person interacting with it. So we commissioned a very expensive piece of equipment from a man called David Hanson in Texas, who builds robots for the Disney Corporation for their theme parks. And we got him to build us a robot. And you see what he's got inside the head are about 30 different servo motors that replicate the muscles in the face, and then puts over that a very realistic prosthetic. And then we just have the head, we put a wig on it and a shirt, dress it up, and it looks a bit like this. So the finished product you see on the right and without the wig on the left. And you can see that the facial expressions are extraordinarily realistic. We can pull it into these different, it's very expressive, very realistic. And we thought this was going to be very interesting to see how people interacted with it. So the first experiment we had to do was to see if people actually could recognize emotions. So we got some videos off one of the DVDs that we had of acted emotions and ran our face tracker on them, used those to control a stick figure animation, to control a cartoon animation. So the person with the beard is entirely synthetic, it's just a cartoon animation, and the one on the right is our robot. And we got them to act out 5 different emotions, 3 videos of each, and asked them what they perceived. And the answer is, when they looked at the actor, they got it right about 90% of the time. And when they looked at our robot, they got it right about 30% of the time. That's very nearly down at chance. The Avatar cartoon was slightly better, and actually the stick figure was even better than the cartoon. So the answer was our robot was, well, pretty well rubbish, and that turns out to be right. The robot movements, although the expressions, static expressions, are very good, the movements are not, and they unnerved people. They just thought it was creepy. So this robot, very expensive, very useless. It is important to know that scientific results don't always work. And this robot turned out to be an expensive mistake. Well, I say an expensive mistake. It wasn't, because if you've got a robot with an expressive face, the press will beat a path to your door to interview you about it. So here you see me and my student, Ian Davis, going on a chat show on Spanish television to demonstrate it. So this was a live show, and we'd programmed the robot so that it had a face tracker pointed at my face, and it was just copying whatever I did. And you can see that the movement is very unnatural and a bit delayed. It doesn't really matter, it turns out. People want to believe that robots work. And everyone thought, you can see them all in the background, totally impressed. And here you see the program doing the analysis. And just by moving slowly and so on, I can sort of make it look vaguely plausible. And it turned out that the host of the show actually, in about 3 minutes rehearsal in the afternoon, worked out that what he had to do was move very slowly and very exaggerated motions, which he then did, and it made the robot look wonderful. So this was a great outing. We got to go to Madrid to appear on television, and everyone thought it was a success, but it's not really. It turns out that robots like that aren't terrifically useful. And there's a funny problem here. People seem to think that robots actually we're going to get realistic robots, and we're not. They're always going to be like this, and there's a sort of funny confusion that takes place. people think that we're going to evolve into robots. You see headlines like this in the press that robots are going to take over the world and are going to change our lives. Their next stage of evolution or something like that. And it's a terrible confusion, really. We seem to think that the robots will be like us, but they're not. Then they're not like us. They're a poor physical representation. I showed you the best there is, and it's rubbish. But more importantly, you don't have a relationship with them. They recognize and display emotions, but that's not the same as having emotions. And of course, they have absolutely no spiritual content. So mechanical robots that look like people aren't actually terribly interesting. But there are robots that are interesting. And this man, Vint Cerf, one of the people who designed the internet, gave a very interesting talk in which he said that anything that takes input and produces output that has a perceptible effect on the world is effectively a robot. And once you say that, you see that we do have a lot of robots around us, and maybe they're a problem. They're the autonomous cars. They're aeroplanes that fly themselves or rely on computers to work. They are automatic stock trading system. And I picked those examples because the cars are becoming widespread. We now have driverless taxis operating in some cities. The aeroplanes ones are relevant because making an aeroplane that can only be controlled by computer and then getting the computing wrong is a bad idea, as Boeing discovered with the 737 MAX. And stock trading systems that automate trading of stocks were major contributing factors in the 2008 financial crisis. But these pale into insignificance compared with the real danger to us today, which is social media. And you may not think of social media as a major threat, but they are. And the observation is people use them because they're free. Of course, they're not free. If something is free at the point of delivery, it means you're the product. And what's happening is the social media companies are monitoring you, learning about you using this sort of machine learning, and using it so they can show you more of what you like, because that allows them to show you more advertising. And the more you're engaged, the more advertising you'll watch. And they're also harvesting your address book because they know that your friends are probably have similar tastes. Show them the same videos, and they'll stay and they'll make more money. Now, that sounds like a good idea. It shows you things that you're interested in. But what it means is you don't get challenged. You just hear more of what you approve. And we've seen that this has dramatic effects on people, political opinions. And then actually people like each other's posts, and that's the way they get affirmation and approval. People have lost the idea of relating to other people, and they just relate with a computer and numbers. And these are exceptionally dangerous systems. They're really corrosive on society. They are absolutely to be avoided. I don't use any social media, and I strongly recommend that my students don't either. And the use of this sort of machine learning is actually a growing problem. And we'll lose human skills because we rely on automation. These systems are being used for purposes like recruitment, where bias is built in. We've seen election disinformation through social media. Some states use monitoring of their population for social control. They monitor the population, not just to see if you're doing something they disapprove of, but actually to frighten you into not even saying things that they might disapprove of. And of course, there's the whole world of autonomous weapons, which is exceptionally distasteful. So these are major problems, and it's nothing to do with robots that look like people becoming sentient, and it's entirely to do with the people building these systems. And actually, that's really the important thing here. there are huge ethical issues in these machine learning systems and in robotics, but they're the same as any other profession. You need to build, professionals are well paid because they're highly trained, so they need to do a good job. And the trouble with the stock market automatic trading systems were they were done badly, and that led to the stock market crash. And your motivation matters. You're well paid because you are trusted to do things for a good reason. You trust the doctor to be motivated by wanting to cure people rather than just to make money. But the motivation of, well, pretty well, Boeing for sure was profit, didn't work. For the stock market people was profit, didn't actually work. But for the social media, they're making enormous amounts of money out of exploiting people. And that's actually just plain unprofessional. Which is actually an important note because you are students and you are going to be professional computer scientists, and it's really important that you live by the professional code. So pay attention to the ACM's ethical code, professional code, when you're working in real life. And on that note, I'll probably finish. I should just say I've talked about lots of things. It's the work of about 40 or 50 research students and postdocs I've had. These are some that I just happen to have photographs of who've contributed particularly to the work and very talented from, I think, in those 22 people, there are 13 different nationalities. So we are a very international group. And it's been a huge pleasure working with them and a huge pleasure talking to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir, for this insightful session. Our enthusiastic audience has some questions for you in the Q&A section. Can you see the questions, sir?
I can, yes. So good. Let's tackle those. So first question is, how do I tackle cases where people intentionally hide their emotions? And that's a very good question. So the answer is people can act. They can dissemble. And I mentioned that most of our systems have been trained on acted data. So actually, the very data that we're training the machine learning system on is intentionally deceptive. And these techniques don't really work for detecting deception. A lot of people think that you can have a lie detector that works through some of these techniques. It turns out not to be true. You may know of the polygraph system, which measures things like skin conductivity, heart rate, and scientifically, they're pointless. They do nothing. What they are theatre. They make people, frighten people into being honest. So that doesn't work. And actually, even monitoring their faces, there's some suggestion that some facial expressions you can detect deception, but it's never been scientifically validated. So the answer is yes, people can deceive this. And actually, when we were doing the experiment with the autistic children, we were getting them to act out emotions because that was the way they learned how they work. So no, this is not a deception testing system. And that's an interesting question, how you might do detection of deception, but this isn't the way. So next question, do machines or chatbots, to be precise, respond to us based on pre-programmed responses or pattern recognition? And can they respond? Well, the answer is that the modern large language models are certainly not pre-programmed responses. What they're doing, though, is pattern recognition. They've been trained on vast volumes of data. I think I worked out that the latest versions of ChatGPT are trained on something like the entire contents of the university library in here in Cambridge, which fills several buildings. So vast amount of information, and they're just doing pattern recognition. If they see a sequence of words that they've seen something a bit like it before, there's no understanding, but they can pattern match and produce something that's probably the right response. So is it pre-programmed? Well, only insofar as it's used the training data to build a model, but the model is then what does things generatively. And we certainly see that with the chat systems which are prone to the problem of hallucination. They invent things that look plausible, but are not actually true. They have no idea of truth. All they know of what looks reasonable, and that's very good for easy chatting. It turns out to be actually quite good for treating patients with psychological problems, for depression or whatever. They want someone to talk to, and they don't care whether what the other person is saying is true or not. But it's not pre-programmed, but it's also not necessarily true. A lot of these chatbots are described as stochastic parrots. In other words, they're just repeating things that look plausible based on probability, but aren't actually necessarily true. And yes, a very good question. How does the dimensional model account for cultural differences in expressions? For example, head nods and wobbles are quite different in India, and that's absolutely right. And that's a really good example, and have nuanced, subtle meanings depending on the context. So yes, yes, and yes. Very good question. So by and large, the facial expressions are universal across cultures. But you're absolutely right. The head gestures, so I think in India, nodding can indicate disagreement and shaking the head agreement. And there are other rather more subtle head gestures as well. And you're quite right. Our original system wouldn't have recognized that, which is why we concentrated more on muscle movements in the later systems. So yes, there are important cultural differences there. And context was the other thing that was mentioned, and that's also extremely important. If I had more time, I would have explained some of the work we've done on context, some of the work that Simon Baron-Cohen's done on context. I'll talk about his work because it's a clearer example. What he did was having done that experiment with the original DVD that I talked about, he made another one where he made little cartoon films of trains and things like that with people's faces on the front of them and the actors' faces acting out emotions. And the emotions were appropriate for the story that the trains were going through. And it turns out children with Asperger's syndrome, high functioning autism, like trains because trains go in regular patterns and they like things to have regularity. And if a train comes off the railway line, then they empathize with it. And so they can understand the context. Oh, and that facial expression fits in that context. With his original DVD, where they were just learning the videos, they got very good at recognizing the videos on the DVD, but not in translating it elsewhere. Having done the work with the story DVD with context, the children were able to transfer that to generalize to other contexts. So that was a very important indication. So yes, you're absolutely right. Context is important, and no, we haven't yet worked out how to do it. Now, of course, you get a lot of contextual information. Most people nowadays are fairly heavily instrumented. They carry mobile phones that monitor a lot of things to do with body movement, which can tell you whether they're walking or sitting and the level of energy. You can make inferences from that. They even have, wearing smart watches that are monitoring their pulse and even skin conductivity, and you can use that. You can get a bit of contextual information. It all depends really how much you want to monitor people and build up the context. Of course, what you then have to do is learn how to interpret it, and if you're using machine learning, that's going to require a lot of data. So going back to our car example, I did mention that when we were doing the driving on the real roads, we had cameras pointing out from the car so we could see the context. The trouble is we couldn't control it in an experimental way, and that meant we didn't make much progress. Later in the simulator, we found a way of changing the context and getting better information out of that as well. Yeah, yes. What's my perspective on sycophantic tendencies. Yes, in large language models and potential psychologically. Well, it's all part of the same thing, isn't it? It's just there to make more money for the companies that run it. So it's obviously a bad thing. It's very bad for you to be told that you're brilliant all the time. You need criticism. It's good for you. So it's just bad in that respect, but it's also actually people realize that, and actually there's been a certain amount of pushback against this crawling sycophancy in some of the modern chat systems. People just, it wasn't realistic because real people just don't crawl that much, or at least by and large they don't. So that actually damaged their performance. Oh, well, yes, somebody asked Sans same question, that ChatGPT is trying to be more agreeable and agree, but actually, if you overdo it, people don't like it. But if you do it, well, you'll sell more advertising. Like I say, these are things well worth avoiding. Oh, so a really interesting question about identifying contrasting emotions that have similar non-verbal cues, interested and confused at the same time. Absolutely, and that's where context information might well be important. But as I say, in a sense, trying to identify a single mental state is not a very good idea because people are usually expressing more than once. And so, yes, you need to have, I'm not sure that interested and confused are actually contrasting. You can be interested and confused at the same time, as somebody was when I started speaking. That's very reasonable. To be interested and bored at the same time, I think, would be relatively unusual. So yes, you may well have several simultaneously occurring mental states. A really interesting question about, do I think that systems trained on historical emotional data risk being based on how emotions were expressed in the past and not how they are now? And that's an interesting question. Probably the answer is enough of this is built in that it's not changed very quickly. I mentioned that when we repeated Darwin's experiment, we found essentially the same results as Darwin found. So things hadn't changed over the intervening, well, actually, it was by the time we did it about 130 years. And I don't think facial expressions are changing that quickly. Yes, I mean, language changes, language is dynamic. And I suppose one answer to this is that the best systems will repeatedly be training, learning as they go. So that's of some importance there. So I don't think there's a huge change with time, not in the physical expressions. It's just it takes generations for that to change. Facial expressions are I think we talked about that. People mask their expressions. They do, and although the observation is that people mask them in the presence of other people, but much less so when they're just interacting with a computer system. So, and there's good evidence for this from a slightly different context, which is to do with doctors and people going for an initial consultation with a doctor. They tend to be much more honest with a computer system than they are with a physical person sitting in front of them. So, yes, people can mask their feelings, but also it's quite hard to mask things for long. And so there's there's probably some hope there, but if somebody wants to deceive the system, as I said, that's going to be entirely possible. All right, more philosophical question. Do I think effective computing might move beyond pattern recognition towards reasoning and moral cognition? The answer is no, I don't. But we've got to be a bit careful here, because what do we mean by that? And there's actually a really important underlying question here, and that's the difference between humans and machines. Whatever we're doing with the machine is a simulation. It's not the real thing. People are the real thing. In uh, uh, Christian beliefs, we talk about Jesus being begotten, not made. So, begotten meaning he was a human person. He wasn't made like Adam, the first person, but he was begotten. He was totally human. Now, actually, it's rather important for Christian belief that he was also totally God. So, human, shared our world, but God doing something very special for us. And that's a rather interesting use of language, but that distinction between begotten and made, between real human and simulated human, is an important one to keep in mind. And of course, a lot of people are prepared to think of computers as if they're actually got personalities. They haven't. They're a simulation. And when people present computer systems and ask you to engage with them as if they're people, that's actually quite a deceptive thing to be doing. And so it's something that we need to be cautious about. It brings us back to the issues of professional responsibility. You might be able to make a very good simulation, might be competent, but you need to think very hard why you're doing it. What is your motivation? And actually, one of the things that really distinguishes us as people is that we have relationships, real relationships. We actually care about people, whereas with machines we don't. So my granddaughter likes playing with her dolls, but if she's bored, chucks them away and goes on to do something else. It's uh, a simulation of a baby. But when she meets her little baby sibling, she might want to cuddle the baby sibling, but she doesn't throw the baby away when she's bored. Well, she might want to, but we discourage her from doing that. Children know that there's something different about somebody with whom they have a real relationship. And that's true for us in older age as well. You know, I'm really fond of my smartphone. Use it all the time. Love it. And I care about it. I look after it. I do keep its battery charged, and if it gets the screen cracked, I get the screen replaced, and if the battery starts losing charge, I get a new battery, and I look after it. But eventually, it just hasn't got enough memory to do whatever it is I want to do this week, so I throw it away and get a new one. We don't do that with people. If somebody is getting old and their battery is going flat, their heart's not working very well, we put in a heart pacemaker to keep it going. And if their eyesight goes, well, we give them glasses to improve it. We repair the screen. And then, if their mind begins to go and they're not quite the same person, we don't throw them away and get them a new person who's got the memory. We love them and care for them still. So people are very different from machines and will never have relationships, real relationships with machines in the way that we can with people. Oh, someone says these sort of simulations fail to capture the layered emotional complexity. And that's absolutely right. They do fail to capture the emotional complexity of a real relationship. Doubtless people will try and make systems that do, but I very much doubt they'll succeed, or at least if we're careful, we won't let them succeed. Somebody asks about incorporating multiple input modalities, so facial expressions and tone of voice and body, to get a better inference of somebody's mental state. Yes, it's a good idea. Again, I didn't have a chance to talk about it. We've done work on that, combining particularly face and voice to do a multimodal recognition, and you can get a bit more accurate. It turns out the face is a very good indicator of valence, that horizontal axis in the dimensional view of emotions, and the voice is a very good indicator of arousal, the vertical axis. So actually combining them can be quite helpful. Trouble is that the dimensional model itself isn't brilliant. I think that's probably most of the questions, and I see that we've run pretty well to the end of the time, so we probably ought to be stopping about there. So thank you very much.
As we conclude this wonderful session on computation of emotions, I'm glad that I have the distinct privilege of expressing our collective gratitude to Professor Robinson. Sir, thank you for sharing your remarkable insights into the intersection of human emotions and computational systems. Your pioneering work at Cambridge University and the Rainbow Research Group has not only deepened our understanding on human-computer interaction, but also paved the way for a future where technology can truly comprehend and respond to human experience. We are especially grateful for the way you connected theory with practice, demonstrating how emotion-aware computing is being applied across diverse domains. These real-world applications bring profound relevance to our academic pursuits. Now, I would like to thank Dr. Aswani Kumar Cherukuri, our faculty coordinator and distinguished professor in cybersecurity, cryptography, and information security. As a senior member of the ACM and vice chair of IEEE's Task Force on Educational Data Mining, Dr. Kumar has earned international acclaim, including recognition as one of the top 2% scientists by Stanford University. So, we would like for you to say a few words.
Sure. Thank you, Dr. Peter Robinson. It's an amazing presentation talking about various aspects of detecting the emotions. The way you have taken the journey across the last 2 decades. It's truly inspiring, and I'm sure that your work is a pioneering work and will take us forward towards even further to understand the human cognitive abilities, instilling these cognitive abilities in the robots in future. Thank you very much, sir, for joining us, sharing your experience and expertise with our students, who I am sure that they must have got enough information and also inspiration from your thought-provoking session. And in spite of your busy schedule, you have accepted our invitation and shared your wisdom. Thank you very much, Professor.
Well, thank you very much for the invitation, and thank you for your attention, and thank you for the really outstandingly interesting questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. It's an amazing session. Thank you, sir. On behalf of ACM VAT student chapter, I would like to sincerely thank you for your experience, sharing your experience and expertise and words of wisdom with us. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir, for gracing us with your presence. I will now go ahead and conclude the session. Thank you so much again.
Thank you. Bye-bye now.